Imagine you're a painter in London. The year is 1881. You're working on what you hope will be your masterpiece. The rain is hammering against the studio glass, and you reach for your favorite tube of paint. It's a rich, warm shade called Mummy Brown. You love the texture. It's creamy, transparent. It mixes perfectly with oil. It smells earthy. Then a friend visits, a chemist, and he tells you the truth. Mummy Brown isn't just a fanciful trade name. You are painting with the crushed, ground-up remains of an ancient Egyptian priest. You panic, you run to the garden, you dig a hole, and you give your paint tube a Christian burial. This actually happened, but burying the paint was the least weird thing the Victorians did with the dead. They didn't just paint with them, they ate them, they wore them, they burned them, and in one case, they sold 180,000 of them for fertilizer. You think mummies belong in museums behind glass, but for 400 years they were in your medicine cabinet, your paint tubes, and on your dinner plate. You didn't just look at history, you consumed it. Welcome to the Anomalous Archive. Today we are opening the file on the corpse economy. Let's start with the paint, the pigment known as caput mortuum, or deadhead. For centuries, if you walked into an art supply shop in Paris or London, you could buy Mummy Brown. It was prized by the masters. If you look at the shadows in Martin Droling's Interior of a Kitchen, or the rich earth tones in Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, you are looking at human DNA. The fleshiest parts of the mummy were considered the best for creating the pigment. It was described as having a flowery and soft texture. But there was a problem: economics. The demand for this paint was so high that it outpaced the supply of authentic Egyptian mummies. So what does a free market do when resources run low? It improvises. Suppliers began substituting. They raided the bodies of executed criminals, enslaved people. In the aftermath of the French Revolution, it was whispered that the hearts of French kings were taken from the Abbey of Saint-Denis and processed into paint. The supply chain of the art world was literally built on the desecration of the poor and the defeated. The most famous incident involves the artist Edward Burne-Jones. He had used Mummy Brown for years, assuming the name was a joke. In 1881, he was visited by Lawrence Alma Tadema, who assured him he had personally seen a mummy being ground up in a colourman's workshop. Burne-Jones was so horrified that he fetched his tube of paint and gave it a decent burial in his garden. His nephew, the writer Rudyard Kipling, watched him do it. But the industry didn't stop there. The British colourman C. Robertson and Company sold the pigment until 1964. When asked why they stopped, the company director told Time magazine, "We might have a few odd limbs lying around somewhere, but not enough to make any more paint." If painting with the dead is too abstract for you, how about eating them? This is the file on medical cannibalism. It started with a translation error. The Persian word mumia referred to a healing black mineral wax found on mountains. But when Europeans translated Arabic medical texts, they confused the wax with the black, bitumen-soaked bodies of mummies. So, naturally, they decided the bodies themselves were the medicine. This leads us to the legend of the Mellified Man. According to the Chinese naturalist Li Shizhen, writing in 1597, there was a specific recipe for this. An elderly donor in Arabia would volunteer to sacrifice himself. He would stop eating food and consume only honey. He would bathe in honey. Eventually, his sweat and feces would consist entirely of honey. When he died, his body would be sealed in a stone coffin, filled with honey. After a century, the seal would be broken. The body would have dissolved into a human honey confection. This substance was said to heal broken limbs instantly. You might think this is just a legend, but the consumption of human remains was a daily reality for the European elite. Meet King Charles II of England. His favourite pick-me-up was a tincture called the King's Drops. The main ingredient? Crushed human skulls mixed with alcohol. Think about that. At the exact same time Europeans were colonising the world, labelling indigenous cultures savages for their rituals, the King of England was sipping pulverised skull from a crystal glass to cure a headache. But paint and medicine were boutique industries. To truly understand the corpse economy, we have to look at scale. We have to look at fertilizer. In 1888, an Egyptian farmer near Beni Hassan was digging in the sand and fell into a pit. He had discovered a mass grave, but not of humans. He had found the votive offering site for the goddess Bastet. The pit contained approximately 180,000 mummified cats. Now, an archaeologist would see a treasure trove. A capitalist saw a commodity. These weren't studied, they weren't catalogued, they were sold by the ton. In 1890, 19 tons of these mummified cats were shipped to Liverpool, England. They were put up for auction. The auctioneer, showing a true Victorian sense of humour, actually used a mummified cat skull as his gavel to mock the proceedings. The buyers? Farmers. The cats were pulverised into dust and spread over the fields of England to help grow turnips. Now, I need to make a correction here. You may have heard the story that mummies were used as fuel for locomotives. Mark Twain wrote about this in The Innocents Abroad, joking that the trains wouldn't run on plebeians and the engineer had to pass out a king. Historians generally agree that Twain was being satirical. Mummies burn well, but not that well. But the paper industry? That's a different story. During the American Civil War, rag shortages led a man named Augustus Stanwood to import mummies to turn their linen wrappings into paper pulp. So if you buy an antique book from the 1860s, there is a non-zero chance the paper you are touching was once the shroud of an Egyptian. We often look at the ancient Egyptians and say they were obsessed with death. They spent their entire lives preparing for the afterlife. They perfected the art of preservation so that their souls could return to their bodies and live forever. And in a dark, twisted irony, they succeeded. They did achieve immortality, just not the kind they wanted. They didn't wake up in the field of reeds. They woke up in a paint tube in London. They woke up in a medicine jar in Paris. They woke up in a fertilizer spreader in Liverpool. They became commodities. So here is my question for you. If you were cleaning out your attic and you found an old, dusty tube of mummy brown paint, be honest. Would you give it a decent burial? Or would you put it on eBay? This has been a file from the Anomalous Archive. If you want to explore more dark corners of history, make sure you are subscribed.